Hello, my name is Austin Svensson Mills, and I will be presenting my PowerPoint on constructivism. So, what is constructivism? Constructivism is a theory in the way people learn. It's about how people take their previous experiences and apply it to new knowledge. In constructivism, a classroom setting has a lot of different techniques, strategies, and activities to help create the knowledge that students need to learn. It encourages students to reflect on their previous experiences and acknowledge that their understanding of something might be changing. In having this understanding, the teacher is able to build upon existing knowledge and guide their current activities in the right direction. Moving on, we have the foundational theorists of constructivism, and those are Jean Piaget, Lev Vygotsky, John Dewey, and Jerome Bruner. And those four men also have theories of their own, but they all correlate to the same mode of understandings. Next is how constructivism differs from traditional teaching and learning. In a traditional setting, teaching is about the student sitting passively while the teacher delivers the information, which does not lead to a very engaging learning experience. Whereas in constructivism, it turns learning into an experience for students. It turns learning into an experience for students so that they may take things in more actively and with a more hands-on approach to build upon their current knowledge. Curriculum. The curriculum of the classroom does not necessarily change just because constructivism is involved. It just makes the learning experience more engaging rather than having students passively taking in or not taking in the information the teacher is delivering. It turns learning into a more social event and gives the students and teachers a chance to experience teamwork between themselves as they work together in building knowledge. Now, how students are viewed. Learning is a more hands-on and active opportunity for students. Students take responsibility for their own learning instead of relying on the teacher to give them the knowledge in a lecture form that they may or may not remember later, because lectures are very passive types of learning that the students are supposed to absorb. The student controls what they learn. In doing this, the student is able to share their opinions and whether or not their viewpoint on something has changed. Next is how students work. Students work in a more social pattern with hands-on activities and experiences instead of passively taking in what their teacher may be lecturing. And I'm only using lecturing as an example because that is the most common way that teachers do convey what they're teaching. The learning is more interactive and very student-centered. In the constructivist classroom, students primarily work in groups or with partners because working individually would not be very plausible if students are to build their knowledge by bouncing off of one another. The teacher's role. The teacher's role is simply to be a facilitator for students. And what is meant by that is that the teacher will ask open-ended questions, mediate conversations, and help students have an assessment of their understanding and development of their learning. Now, assessment. Traditional assessment is not plausible in a constructivist setting, so it is more about whether or not the student has learned what is supposed to be learned, rather than if they have learned it perfectly. Assessment is very formative rather than summative, because the purpose of the constructivist setting is to enhance the learning of students. If a teacher were to try to assess their students, it would have to be either because the class is small or because the teacher knows the class so well that they can say, hey, they've learned this, or they have not mastered this. Regardless, assessment would be fairly passive. Moving on, what is the PAR model? The PAR model stands for present, apply, and review. In present, learning goals are gone through, new material is presented, and learning is checked throughout the entirety of the lesson. In apply, students are given an opportunity to show what they have been able to achieve in their learning, and it requires them to apply that information. In this middle stage, students should be examined and only encouraged because it is not about them getting it perfect, it is about them getting it right and trying their best. In the review stage, everything that has been learned is reiterated and only main key points are emphasized upon. How the PAR model relates to constructivism. The PAR model supports and complements the constructivism way of teaching and learning because it allows students to build upon their current knowledge with new knowledge. This knowledge would otherwise be forgotten because of the passive way of teaching for the most part. In using the PAR model with constructivism, this is giving the students the opportunity to take in their new knowledge that they built upon the old and put it to the test. In being able to almost immediately apply what they have learned in one way or another, they are being able to link their knowledge with memories. It will also allow them to see their errors in their learning easier this way as well and review what to work on in order to master what they are learning about. And my learning scenario that I have chosen, in my learning scenario, I will be introducing my second grade class to word problems. Word problems are usually introduced in the second grade. And it's a perfect example of using the PAR model in a learning scenario and constructivist classroom setting as well. Instead of using the word word, I will replace it with the word story so that it is now called a story problem. My students know what a story is, and at this point we can count to 100 and read most sentences. We also know how to add and subtract two-digit numbers. With all of this previous knowledge, my second graders will be able to solve story problems perfectly well. They will relate the short problem to their ability to read and relate that to the stories that I read in class. To build upon their previous math experience, we will start out with only working on adding and subtracting through word problems. For example, if I have 23 students and 32 pieces of candy, and I give everyone one piece of candy, how much candy will I have left over? My students will be able to go through and read the problem with their previous knowledge of print awareness, use their problem-solving method of reasoning, then subtract 32 from 23 using their previous knowledge of subtraction, and get the answer of 9. They will then be able to write a complete sentence to answer the question using their previous knowledge of sentence structure and grammar. Well, thank you so much for listening or watching my PowerPoint presentation. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned a lot about the constructivist classroom.